afternoon, everyone. Uday said, show up with a loud voice. It's after lunch, and it could be a problem with the crowd. So I'm going to try to do that for you. I'm Jim Simon. Uday, first off, thank you to you and your team. What a wonderful event today. Secondarily, I just want to thank all the engineers in the audience, which is probably the majority of us. It is National Engineers Week. I don't know if everyone knew that. If you haven't seen LinkedIn lately, you may not remember that, but it's National Engineers Week, and I look at engineers. I am one myself. I've got 4 kids that are engineers out of 5. I'm not sure about what happened with the 5th one, but ultimately it's where innovation comes from in the country. And that's really what I've seen from a thought leader standpoint at the conference today and in this week. It's really a bunch of thought leaders in the energy transition space, in the oil and gas and chemical space. So thank you all for what you do. Glad to be able to talk about advanced recycling and how it fits in the circular economy, and also give you a little bit of an overview of Braven Environmental and just what we do. First and foremost, transitioning from a linear, we can go forward on the slide. Is that my job, Uday?
No, sorry.
Now it is. Transitioning from a linear to a circular economy is much more than just a transition. It's more of a transformation in our space. Think about it traditionally in some of the energy spaces. You ultimately transition by technology evolution and by some consumer decision making. In our space, it's both the consumer decision making on top of the technology, but on the back end, it's also the end of life decisions that those consumers then make with the products that ultimately drive the circular economy. So that's requiring a few things to make a vision of a truly circular economy in plastics work. It requires an incentive system that supports the circular economy. Ultimately, that's driven less by regulation in the governments today, but driven by the consumer goods companies and their view of what all of us as consumers ultimately want to have in our basket of goods that we buy. It also is driven by the eliminations of some bureaucracy that exists today, mostly in permitting, ultimately driving the cost of projects and the cost of time to market on projects. So there's some bureaucratic red tape to eliminate. And then lastly, like I mentioned, it's the building the culture where we all want to recycle on the back end of the life cycle of our products. If you look at some of the things that happen in Europe today, where they're 3x ahead of us in plastics recycling in particular, ultimately driven by they have a culture. They've ingrained it in their culture that there's 6, 8, 10 different bins, and the right products go in the right bins, which then jumpstarts that whole process, which allows the cost structure to be lower and just the cost to get the recycled goods back into the circular economies. Those of you that aren't familiar with waste plastics in the US right now, we recycle roughly 5% of our plastics, and 98+% of that's recycled through mechanical recycling. A very small sliver is recycled through the advanced recycling. In our case, for Braven, it's pyrolysis, but there's a basket of other technologies out there. So this graph really is meant to represent the 84 million tons a year of waste plastics in the US. Where do they come from and where do they go? Ultimately, you see that the first 2 blue bars really focus on the municipal solid waste is about 60% of that number, and then industrial waste is about 40% of that number. Thankfully for Braven and for much of the advanced recyclers, we get to play in both spaces. Both products are good for us. But with 5% or less going to recycling, where's the other 95% show up? Today, 76% of it, roughly 61 million tons, is landfilled. There's a plethora of plastics available in our landfills if we ever have the economic incentive to dig them out and use them. And then another 19% is incinerated, so ultimately combusted into some kind of energy product. Overall, not great from a carbon intensity standpoint, but does something better than landfilling, so we get some of the energy value back. One note, this is an advanced recycling discussion, but ultimately we believe at Braven that it's a combination of the mechanical and the advanced recyclers working together that ultimately drive this market forward. And the next slide kind of sets that up. The graph on the left side here ultimately shows the cycle of plastics production and then running into the plastics as a waste. It's really the light gray graph portion there, the fraction that is meant to be the collection, sortation, and preparation of feedstocks for other uses that ultimately can drive circularity. And today that same cycle of sortation, cleaning, and separation, densification, and whatnot fits both mechanical and recycling spaces. So when we say say the two of us grow well together, it's ultimately because of the feedstock side. As that cost structure on the feedstock side lowers down, it allows a proliferation of the technology that exists today and future technologies to be able to ultimately recycle more and more of the product. The graph on the right really shows global polymer demand, and you can see the large gray bars are really representative of the virgin plastics. It's a 2040, if you can't read it, 2020 to 2040 scale. And in 2040, it's 93% virgin plastic, and ultimately by 2020, it's 93%. By 2040, it's just over 70%. So that difference is made up with combination of mechanical recycling and then advanced recycling. The CAGRs, the compounded annual growth rates on the far corner there show it's expected to be, and this is a McKinsey study, expected to be a 2% growth rate over the time period of the 20 years of the virgin plastic derived feedstock, an 8% growth rate of plastics coming into the market worldwide from mechanical recycling, and a 22% growth rate on advanced recycling. So where does that come from? Ultimately, it comes from the commitments made by consumer goods companies as to how much recycled content they want in their products and how that transfers back through the marketplace against the growth curves of needs for plastics and whatnot worldwide. So why does society want to take on this challenge right now? I think we've got a number of large challenges going on across the globe. We've boiled this down as we look at it, kind of why now for advanced recycling and ultimately for recycling in general. Three reasons why plastic recycling is a significant issue today. One is plastic waste is much more routinely and increasingly found in our food supply. Anyone's read any of the articles on the ocean, the amount of microplastics in your average fish is on the rise and definitely not healthy. And then ultimately, the amount of plastics in the ocean will outweigh the amount of fish in the ocean over the next decade or two. So that's reason one. Reason two is it really is filling up our landfills and polluting our skies from an incineration standpoint. That's good relative to the alternative. We talked earlier today about the role of plastics in society. Ultimately has a place for all growing societies and continuing high growth societies in terms of we need to do more with plastics. We also need to be smarter with what the end of life looks like for those. And lastly, the reason society can take it on today is the technologies exist. Mechanical recycling has grown quite rapidly over the last decade or so. Advanced recycling, especially on the chemical side, is in its infancy, but ultimately as a platform is in a position to be able to grow quite aggressively. On a life cycle analysis standpoint, the slide really is meant to talk to just what the benefits are to using a blend of 5% pie oil, so pyrolysis-based oil with a blend of 95% virgin naphtha in the making of high-density polyethylene. You can see from the graph, this is an Argonne National Lab study from the late 2000s, late 2020s, early 2021 time period. 69% reduction in fossil fuel use, 55% reduction in water consumption, solid waste down. Actually, because of the pulling it out of the landfills, it's actually a negative. It's down 116%. And then the carbon, on a true carbon life cycle standpoint, it's down 22%. Again, that's a 5% blend. There's some contention in the marketplace on, is this study real or not? Does it pass muster? It was a combination of, I think, 8 of us that gave input into Argonne National Lab, so it's kind of a meta study, if you will. So it's not the hard LCA that any one of us would do. Ultimately, a couple of our competitors have done them recently, and they show similar results. We're about 3 months away from being able to do our own LCA, which will ultimately show, we believe, similar results, better in some areas, just as we know how our energy balances look. But there's a huge opportunity here, and then ultimately it grows beyond that as the production scales up to beyond 5%. These graphs can ultimately show a higher curve trending down and in the right direction. Like I said, we'll do our own study here over the end of the summer period and have something more to share. But that's really the why. We've got the capability as a society today, and arguably there's enough incentive in the consumer side of the goods. This isn't advanced recycling. Nowhere in the U.S. do I know of an advanced recycling regulation that helps drive economics. This really is a consumer-driven, consumer goods company-driven incentive system as we speak. There are a number of challenges. Those challenges are a combination of supply side, which is ultimately what happens on getting the waste recycled and pulled back into the potential for recycling, and then additionally on the demand side, in terms of, well, where's the demand for the advanced recyclers product. Right now, the top two bars, the red and the orange, if you will, lead to that 95% not recycled outcome, and then the recycled recovered piece really is driven by majority of that's driven by mechanical recycling. There's a number of things we're working on today in terms of handling the demand side, and that's feedstock quality and price point, which this is a bit of a build it and they will come situation. As the advanced recyclers proliferate and announce projects, we see more and more opportunities in the marketplace from the feedstock side of the business, where folks are investing in recycling programs, investing in the equipment needed at the back end of their facility to be able to sell their product or their waste stream into someone like us. So as our company, which is 13 years old, started 12 plus years ago, we were talking about getting paid to take the waste. Well, that's changed drastically to now we're talking about what we have to pay for the right quality of waste, and arguably we look at it as the right quality of feedstock. Mentioned that there's a good pull from the market for what we're doing today in a consumer goods perspective. Ultimately, the regulatory efforts are lagging behind that. They are needed, and there are some positives. Three panels here that really represent multiple approaches in the far left panel. You can see there's a mix of American, Canadian, and European flags at the top of that. I would argue all these elements, all 6 elements listed there, are further advanced in the EU than they are in Canada and they are in the US. Two that matter to us a lot, though, and we see opportunity in, is the extended producer responsibility, and ultimately ideally we'd have what's called EPR Plus, which is the industry's version of that. So it's not driven by law and regulation, it's driven by the industry coming together and setting a standard. And that's really the petrochem producers coming together and setting a set of standards that make up the extended producer responsibilities, where they self-inflict the right regulations to support the greater good of their product make over time. Obviously, better to have that environment than to have one where the laws are promulgated by folks who may or may not know the space well enough. We support that effort and ultimately work with the American Chemistry Council on the lobbying and the working groups that support those EPR Plus opportunities. In addition to that, the recycled content targets have shown to be a big impact in just that recycling rate, especially as it relates to consumer behavior in various parts of the world. There's a couple areas where we're focused on to help support ourselves. The middle panel is interesting because it's what states have actually regulated laws that allow advanced recycling to be considered a manufacturing process instead of a solid waste handling process. That matters mostly in the permitting and some of the regulatory red tape side of things. You can see it's the center majority of the country, central south majority of the country, with an eye towards the Gulf Coast, obviously, and then the southeast. That becomes the target-rich environments for folks like ourselves to look at additional facilities over time. And ultimately, if you're in the feedstock zone of where mass population centers are and the feedstocks are prevalent, in addition to the regulatory environment's positive, it makes the path to permitting, the path to project startup that much easier. And then the last slide really shows the US versus Europe. They're ahead of us. The Europeans are ahead of us for reasons of twofold. One, they started earlier, and two, that just as a societally, culturally, they care more about this. Like I said earlier, there's numerous bins to recycle at the point of waste, not downstream a number of steps where the cost gets higher. Ultimately, we're at about 5% today. Europe is in the range of 14%. We grow substantially between now and 2060, ultimately to the levels where we see ourselves being in the 11-12% range. Europe's going to be growing at a faster clip than that, where they'll actually have recycled more than half or more than a quarter of their waste stream on waste plastics by then. Much to learn from what the Europeans are doing. Ultimately, positive progress on the regulation side is helping the market development, but much more and faster progress would be beneficial. Counter to the good news is there's a number of states who, we put in quotes, a lack of understanding. For reasons of lack of understanding, which really means they're just against plastics, they're trying to impose some level of ban or restriction on the use of plastics, plastic recycling. So think about it this way, the states, localities, states, regions that don't want to see plastics go after whatever they can to erode the opportunities to recycle and make it a better world with plastics by trying to help eliminate plastics altogether. So you can see there's 11 states represented here. 7 of them are having proposed bans in place, and then the other 4 have some level of restriction. It's interesting, over the sum of those 11 states, there's 30 different proposals in play. So even amongst the states who seem to be against it, they can't get alignment amongst themselves on what a ban or a restriction would ultimately look like. So we see room for understanding to be gained, and ultimately, hopefully, some opinions to be changed. But it is an uphill battle once someone says, I don't want to be in a world with plastics, to try to get them to see that recycling plastics is a great way to eliminate the waste and do it in an environmentally sound fashion. So we'll continue to fight there. American Chemistry Council has been great to work with. A number of our petrochem customers are core to that as well. So that's really where our lobbying and education efforts are going through. That's kind of the backdrop within which I wanted to share a little bit more about Braven. This slide shows up pretty well. So Braven Environmental has been around since 2010. Ultimately, a technology company that's developing its own projects now. We're focused on pyrolysis-based technology that was developed in-house with different teams of engineers and tried with different feedstocks about 5-6 years ago, settled on waste plastics, and then really focused our mission around just what can we be a leader in. And our thought right now, and leadership really sits in the area of taking waste plastic out of the waste system, waste streams, and putting it into renewed pychem, or the py oils that actually become new plastics again through our customers, the major petrochem folks. Our mission for the next decade, so call it 2023 to 2033, is to install the facilities needed to produce or to process 3 billion pounds a year of plastic on an annual basis. So for us, that looks like 5 large-scale facilities located in and around the U.S. And from there, we'll branch out. We've got a couple other go-to-markets that allow us to also focus on tech sales and co-location opportunities. Helps bring the capital cost down and materially proliferates the world, the globe, if you will, with our technology. Right now, we're very much focused on this design, build, own, operate, and maintain model. And really the icons along the middle of the deck there speak to just what that looks like. But just if you haven't been around pyrolysis in a while, or if you've kind of forgot that piece of your chemical engineering education, I had our chief technology officer give me what I wanted to call it as a quote. Our pyrolysis process really is optimized for the largest group of waste plastics, the polyolefins, polypropylene and polyethylene in particular. Our process functions by randomly cracking the polymer chains, which result in complex and wide-ranging pyrolysis vapors. Ultimately, we're taking the liquid polymers, breaking them into much smaller monomers, and then fractionating them on the back end to a mix of liquid products. About 70% of our feedstock turns out as a liquid product, and then another 20% is a gas that we use as our energy source. And then lastly, there's about 8 to 12% char that comes out of the product that we also have as a circular economy registered product that we're looking to go to market with that as well. So across where our competitive advantages lie, ultimately it's in a number of areas. First and foremost, it's our modular feedstock. So we've got a full-scale facility running. We've got a slide that talks to that in just a minute. That facility, that size reactor, really gets supercharged to do the scale up needed for this larger scale facility. Ultimately then, as we look to grow its number of reactors in parallel, it's not bigger and bigger and bigger. So our technology risk gets met one time, and then we have some economies of scale with our modular solution. It's also, you can pick it up and move it. Our first facility is going to have six of these reactors installed in it, expandable up to 24, and then we'll kind of size in numbers of 12. So 12 reactors to a distillation system will be kind of our scale that we're trying to land on, then 12, 24, 36 number of reactors per site. The feedstock aperture is another key piece for us, because a lot of our competitors deal in, I do this feedstock or that feedstock. We take 2s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. We love our 2s and 5s, but ultimately we can deal with a mix of anything that isn't too much oxygen or too much chlorides. That's what it really comes down to, and that is a bit of a competitive advantage. Our running facility in North Carolina is ultimately the next two kind of icons put together. It's allowed us to do two things. One, to prove out the technology and learn, and call it our learning lab, to learn how to best run the technology, how to think of it in terms of going from simple controls to DCS to advanced controls. We're on the cusp of that advanced controls model. We're developing the algorithms now to ultimately run a pyrolysis-based reactor. The other thing we talk about in our modular design is it's not a one heat zone reactor. It's actually a 13 heat zone reactor. So we have micro control over the heat in every different stage of reaction. Each stage is about a 4-foot length of pipe that we convey our product through, and we can control the heat down to 10 degree increments, if you will. So in that control range, we then can optimize yields above what some others are able to do. So 4 years of running that facility and learning through that has allowed us to be in a position to have achieved product sales to 2 major petrochem customers who are now signing up for larger volumes of offtake from our next large facility, which again, great place to be if you're trying to raise money and grow your footprint. And then along the way, we've amassed quite a world scale management team, which is invaluable at this point. It's a strong mix of technical and commercial leaders, ultimately experienced in commercializing both products and technologies, getting them both to market. And that's ultimately what we're doing. PyChem, or our version of Pyoil, is a relatively new product. It has to go through all the regulatory hurdles of the EPA and other government bodies, as well as our plant's new enough design where the permitting isn't obvious sometimes in terms of plant permitting for air permits and other things. So there's a good bit of engineering work that goes into, and commercialization work that goes into making those things happen. And because of all that, we have an ISCC Plus certification. So we're fully, as long as our feedstocks comes in certified ISCC Plus, our plant and our processes are all that way as well. So all 3 of our liquid products and our solid char all go out as ISCC Plus certified products. With that being said, we're at that point where I think Kelly mentioned earlier, we're raising money. Just kicked off a Series C raise earlier in February with Morgan Stanley, and initial feedback is positive. So our goal here is to go from Series C raise to in the field with our first plant design in 3rd quarter of this year, and then ultimately be operational 2nd half of 2025. So how does that fit back into the concept of advanced recycling and the circular economy? We really just kind of try to put it in simple terms here. We take the waste plastics that would otherwise be in landfills or incinerated, we process them through our pyrolysis reactor, bringing out and delivering those products that are shown there in the glass jars in the top right, ultimately then going to our customers who take those products and turn them into plastic pellets that go into the various products that ideally get recycled and complete the cycle. So I look at it and say 20% of what we put in the front end of our machine goes to energy usage. It's produced and used as energy, and the other 80% is produced and used as a recycled product. So in the perfect world, on a good day that we're running, we don't have a waste stream that leaves the facility. And our emissions, because of that, our emissions are relatively low as well. So this slide's a good one to talk to. The other key piece of this how we fit into this space, converting waste plastics to valuable second life products. The 2s, 4s, 5s, and 6s are on aggregate from 2023 about 65 million tons of product of potential feedstock for us. We're looking to use 3 billion pounds a year of that, 1.5 million tons. Ultimately, so we're at about 2.5% of the available market in the U.S. today is what we need to gobble up to meet our mission and really achieve the financial results that we expect to see. Doing that and tackling that 2% market share with a proven circular and scalable technology is ultimately what's cornerstone to our strategy. And then I mentioned the yields previously, but it's about 70% liquid yield that then goes to our customers in the petrochem space. The 20% gas, which is really a fuel gas from my old refining days, ultimately fuels first and foremost our reactors, and then secondarily some steam needs that we have. So there's boilers driven by that same gas. And then the 10% char is finding a home in the likes of asphalt and concrete. That's where it's being targeted today anyway. Quick look at the facility in North Carolina. I love talking about it because it's a differentiator in that we're running today, and it's a big thing to be able to talk about in the marketplace. We've actually fed about 1.5 million pounds of product and produced about 260,000 pounds, 1.5 million tons of feedstock, 260,000 pounds of product. If you do the math on it, that's not the yields I said on the slide before. Partly this really is a learning lab, and we truly have went through a large volume of feedstock in trial runs of this and test runs of that, and really making sure we understand how to run the machine on a go-forward basis. So we believe we've learned enough to get the full-scale design in place, which transitions us to the next scale facility. And right now we're targeting Hooks, Texas. If you've been to Texarkana, right on the Texas-Arkansas border, Hooks is about 10 miles to the west. Small town, has a munitions dump or munitions facility from World War II, and they are turning it into a large industrial park. So we're looking to buy 75 acres of that and place first 6, then 24, and ultimately potentially up to 48 reactors on that site. Good infrastructure, rail and road, and the needed amount of water and other utilities that are required in the area. Ultimately, that allows us to build out what we call our DBOOM model, or design, build, own, operate, and maintain model, which is great for Braven because it's a relatively capital intensive, but the EBITDA is ours, right? The profitability that we make stays within the firm, and it drives a nice valuation for our shareholders. Beyond that, we believe there's 2 other go-to-markets in this strategy that work really well. One is a co-locate. Find your favorite refiner or petrochem facility who has available space in their towers and their tanks and with their infrastructure. Put just our reactors and our feed system in place, and ultimately our cost of capital gets cut roughly in half, and we're in a position to then be making product and fed right into the petrochem value chain from there. So that the co-locate option over time, as we prove ourselves out, we think will be quite profitable and will fit certain customers better than others. And then as we look to go international, not looking to be an international operating company. It's a lot of work. You all that do it, I'm very impressed. We're looking to take and sell our technology, license our technology into those international markets where waste plastics is a problem, much like it is in the U.S., and where there's a consumer, if you will, someone who will buy that as a feedstock to actually complete the circularity piece of our loop. So that's ultimately where we land, a DBOOM plus co-locate plus tech sale model, where we think we've got a corner on the market that will be growing over time, especially out through the next 30 years or so as plastics find their home in the longer term rest of the century model for the world. With that, if you're in need of any pie oil, come see me afterwards. I can cut you a great deal. We got our commercial team over here. And if not, we'd love to talk more about our technology and how we may be able to partner with some of the other thought leaders in the room. So that's it, Uday.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that this is Chemicals Day, so you're making a pitch for pie oil and not asking for waste plastic feedstock.
Absolutely. That's a different conference. But when you have that conference, invite us in, please.
So, Jim, great overview, but when you look at the whole value chain, right, so feedstock sourcing, pyrolysis, pie oil, I guess utilization, right, more broadly speaking, where are the biggest pinch points? There are a lot of companies that are trying to scale up advanced recycling. Absolutely. So just look at it from an industry point of view, and then maybe talk a little bit about how Braven's differentiated across some of those pinch points.
Absolutely. The 2 biggest pinch points that we have, that we see the industry having today, one is feedstock. First and foremost, is it of the right quality in the right location, which location means price from a transportation standpoint. So those are the pinch points that the industry is dealing with. And then at a micro level, us and others are dealing with their own versions of technology evolutions or technology scale-up risks. So for us, it's heat flux. It's as we ramp up our feed rate into our reactors, how do we get enough heat in to actually pyrolyze all the feedstock over the length of the reactor? Technically solvable, that the technology's all there. It's about engineering our way to that solution. So that's an ongoing, the beauty of having a learning lab where we can play with that variable, and then having 13 heat zones that we can tweak. And tweaking can be 200 plus degree difference from one heat zone to the next. It doesn't go up and down as much as it follows a more of a linear progression. But that allows us to do some things in the front end, which is more pyrolysis based, and then do some things on the back end of our reactor that are much more char cleanup, if you will, in preparation for being able to get that into a saleable product mode. So that's what's different about us. We all face the challenge on the feedstock side, but again, with every announcement, with every opportunity where the market sees someone for real, building, if you will, funded and building, then we believe, and we're seeing already, that the feedstock market starts to open up to us.
Okay, and On the pie oil side, fractionating the pie oil, for example, are some of those challenges that you see more broadly across the space, or are those just challenges with specific technologies?
I would say there's a number of folks who have chosen not to pyrolyze or not to fractionate their pyrolysis oil and are selling a crude pyrolysis oil. I think from our standpoint, we limited our market that we could reach if we went to a crude pyrolysis oil. Then you're more into the refinery feedstock space and ultimately a mass balanced approach to getting the ICC Plus certification, where ours is we blend our light and our mid-grade oil and it goes direct to crackers. Our heavy oil, more often than not, is more like a gas oil that goes right to FCCs or cokers, and then there is some mass balancing applied to that. So we see the incremental capital cost of having that fractionation on the back end being worth it to our customers, ultimately worth it to us to have that flexibility.
Yeah, and from a pie oil use point of view, is it primarily into steam crackers, or are you seeing other applications?
Right. To date, it's our small facility has 2 customers. It's both going to steam crackers.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess what are your customers telling you? How much pie oil do you think they can co-feed into these steam crackers?
As far on a percentage on a cracker basis, I think it's very dependent on the cracker and the risk profile of the operating company. From the experiences I've seen in the last year of making these sales, ultimately no one seems uncomfortable in the 5% range, even in the 10% range. So at some point there, then the tightness of the chloride spec really starts to become critical, and some of the other heavy metals, bromide and some other ones, so bromine and some other ones. So there's some tightening of the specs as that percentage goes up, where it's such a small percentage right now that it really hasn't been a constraint at all.
And everybody's planning to put it into a liquids fed cracker. Nobody's thinking of doing this, let's say, in an LPG fed cracker. Or
not that we've talked to so far. We obviously don't rule that out. We do have in our next plant there'll be a condensate stream that actually comes off, pressurized condensate stream that has some nice BTX qualities to it. So we believe there's some other value-added opportunities as we better cut our fractions, if you will. So there'll be opportunities to talk to a wider audience of folks as far as placing that product as well.
Okay. How are these pie oils performing in the steam crackers? Are you getting feedback on that? And what are the products looking like? Any changes, any differences, or it's all the same?
I'd love to say we were at that 5 to 10% range and we were material in their feedstock percentages. So far, we're not. Okay. So the fraction of a percent to a 1% type feed rate that we've received feedback on has been without any issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you see the feedstock space? There are lots of companies that are building mechanical recycling capabilities. If you look at the large waste management companies, they seem to be focused more on building out the mechanical recycling value chain. So are you going to compete with them for feedstock?
The goal is not to at all. I think we will overlap in small ways, but the goal is to be complementary. Think of it as those things that should be mechanically recycled, or that are capable of being mechanically recycled should be, and it's all the tougher to recycle products, waste products, if you will, that should come to the advanced recyclers. And ultimately from that, some of that means at a lower price to us than the mechanical recyclers are ultimately willing to pay. So we haven't had the overlap yet, and like I mentioned, with every announcement, every furthering of the engineering of the funding, we see more and more opportunities showing up of folks who have waste today that are either landfilling or combusting, who then want to get it in some beneficial use. Ultimately, they want to get paid for it, right? So there's an opportunity of a shift, if you will, as these projects get announced, to where more feedstocks are becoming available. There'll be a point where we're just at an inflection where it's just expensive. The marginal cost of taking the next ton of feedstock out of the waste stream is going to be too expensive for us. We're a long ways away from it from what we see today.
In spite of all the capacity that people are claiming they're going to build here.
So the biggest problem we have as advanced recycling, and that we've self-inflicted, is announcing and then not delivering on volumes.
Yeah.
So I would tell you that the cycle goes, this project gets announced, someone starts buying feedstock for it, and they will warehouse it. So then the price for feeds goes up, and then that project doesn't get built and started up on time, or it doesn't get built and started up ever. And then the market has to absorb that product as it's getting resold. So we're seeing that cycle happen for the second time in the last couple of years right now. And I think once we break that cycle and we just start announcing and building and starting up near on schedule, that then the feedstock will start to shift even more available to us.
Okay. So you said you're raising funds. I'm curious, what's the investor class where waste plastics recycling is best positioned for, right? Who are the natural owners for these kinds of plants?
It's a great question. Coming from an engineering and plant background, engineering, construction, and plant background, in my history, I wasn't sure who was going to want to invest in us either. With Morgan Stanley, we went out to nominally a couple hundred investors around the world, most recently with the Series C, and it's been about a 70% pure play financial investors who have some focus on ESG sorts of plays, 25-30% strategics, whether that's in the waste space, the petrochem space, or traditional oil and gas space. So it's about a 2/3, 1/3 split between pure play financials and strategics. The interest seems to be falling in about the same ratio in terms of who's interested, who's in the data room, all the steps through that process. So, and then in the financial space, it really is folks who have, because if you don't know anything about waste plastic today, excuse me, it's really hard to get up to speed and make a decision if you're going to make an investment in 90 days or 120 days. So if you've taken a position that waste plastics is a problem you want to solve, when we touch you all with Morgan Stanley, that your feedback is yes, I'm in or out right away, knowing the space. If they don't know the space, it's just too much to get up to speed. They don't have enough time to hire ADI to get them up to speed effectively. We did that, by the way. No plug there at all.
Thanks, Jim. So in terms of, I guess, let's say the rest of the year, next year, I guess what should we expect from Braven?
Yeah, great question. Ultimately, the next year is really, year and a half, is really going to be focused on getting the 6-reactor phase 1 facility and hooks up and funded, engineered, constructed, and started up. So that's really what, press releases and announces around that. It's our goal to select sites 2 through 5 in parallel path with that. Excuse me, and some of our fundraise will go towards the development of those future sites as well. So we're going to be on a relatively fast growth curve, driven more than anything by the feedstock proliferation, the availability of feedstock. And then along the path, we spent 10-ish years making this technology. We've got the innovative engineers who have a whole list of things they want to do in our next gen technology. So come into the year, you'll start to hear us talking about a next gen offering, which is beyond this reaction technology, beyond, may go to catalytics and may go to other feedstock opportunities that exist. So we're not done yet. To be a leader in this space, you can't just have one technology go to market and ride that pony all the way home. You really have to be willing to innovate and to reinvest in that space. So that's what we're looking to do.
So, but it sounds like there is quite a bit of technology development that will help bend the cost curve down. Absolutely. Beyond just scaling the technology.
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Let me open this up to questions from the audience, see if there are questions.
The first one this time, pretty amazing. First, thank you for a great presentation. Next topic, you took one of my superstars in Chad Hoovey, so he's probably doing great.
He's doing great for us. Thank you very much.
And the question is, as you're growing, if you're to pick the one thing that is keeping you from sort of taking off, what would that be?
It's feedstock. Feedstock at quantity and quality needed to meet our customer expectations, which will then satisfy the financing community. The customers want the product at their specs, of course, and then the money people want to invest in us. The one thing we get questioned on, quizzed on more times than not is show me your path to the feedstock and I'll open my checkbook or I'll open my long-term commitment contract.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, James. Thank you for the presentation. Sorry, over here in the corner. Thank you again for the presentation.
There's a light, yes. Really
enjoyed it. 2 quick questions for you. First, on the map you showed with the bans, like in California, for example, do you see that trend as continuing to advance to other states, pausing where it is, or potentially even receding in some states, removing that longer term?
It's all growing up over the last 24 months or so. So I don't think we're done seeing the growth of it. We put lack of understanding in there because I believe it's not really lack of understanding as much as it's lack of a desire to have plastics in our world today. So we have to come to resolution as a U.S. and ultimately at the state level that if the role of plastics in society going forward. I think once we settle out on that and they see enough information on life cycle analysis, so there truly is a carbon benefit to recycling the plastic and whatnot, there'll be a settling in. I believe we're a hot button issue today for a number of reasons, and 6 months, 2 years from now, we may not be that hot button anymore, and this will calm down. We'd love to see more of the states in this middle graph here go to making it an easier pathway to the permitting and to making advanced recycling happen. But I think along the path, we're going to see more challenges.
Awesome, thank you. Second question, we heard previously in this conference when it was with regards to sustainable aviation fuel, that a lot of the airlines are saying they want to commit to it but aren't willing to pay much of a premium to get sustainable aviation fuel. With your conversations with customers, how excited are they and willing to kind of pay up for this as opposed to a virgin plastic?
Yeah. It's a great question. I would tell you that right now we're in good balance. I've been with the company for a year, and we've seen our price point move up for where it was questionable economically to where it's solidly economic, but not overwhelmingly so. So I think our customers, thankfully, have met us where we needed to be in the marketplace. At the same time, it's because their customers, the consumer goods companies, are willing to put some commitments out there as well, which they're making a bet on us as consumers being willing to pay an extra half cent or whatever the case may be for our packaging, right? And it's a lot of this goes into the packaged goods portion of the economy. So we're seeing great support right now. It could always be better, but we're seeing great support.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, Anna Canary from Aspentech. Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions as well. So number one is, why are you skipping category 1 PET, which is possibly the easiest one to recycle and the largest in terms of like feedstock availability?
Great question. It doesn't do well oxygen concentration levels in our reactor from a pyrolysis processing standpoint, and then it just doesn't doesn't have the same flow characteristics through our reactor as well. So it has some gumming effects that it has on our agar-based reaction system. So others could handle it in various quantities. We're just not. It hasn't been good for our machine.
Sure. I guess the main pathway to recycle, number one, is glycolysis. So they do like solvent dissolution basically instead of pyrolysis, right? And the second question was regarding the temperature profile of your reactors. What are roughly the temperature you're operating? And I guess this is a broader question just for my own understanding. So recycling plastic, especially what you're doing, advanced recycling, is an important pillar of decarbonization, right? Because the product you're creating has a lower carbon footprint than coming from the virgin material. But in terms of like incentives and credits that you can claim, at least at the existing regulatory environment, is there anything that you can benefit from?
Yeah, I'll take the first part of your question. Our range of reaction temperature, so our reactor runs in the 400 to 600 degree Fahrenheit range across those 13 different zones, and it varies by feedstock, it varies by rate that we're flowing through. So it's a lot about residence time, but it's in that, our pyrolysis happens in that 400 to 600 degree range. And then zero incentives in our financial projections, financial models today as it relates to any kind of government-backed incentives. We're negotiating a small tax incentive program with our site in Hooks as we speak. Got strong support from the judge, very important up there. But there is nothing in terms of a REN or a RIN or anything that would be the equivalent. And we have zero, we're taking credit for zero carbon credits, if you will. Partly we haven't done our own LCA, so I'm not feeling comfortable that we even understand our pathway yet. And then we have to go out and create that market. So none of that's in our financials to date.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
More questions?
So thank you for the presentation, Jim. You mentioned that obviously your off-takers want certain specs of the pyrolysis oil. So my question is that obviously that could change based on whatever composition you get of your 2, 4, 5, or 6.
Right.
And so what is the level at which your off-takers are involved in that process of you sourcing feedstock? Do you see more interest from them in helping you out or using the resources to So how do you see that space?
Yeah, the specs matter tremendously, and because of that, we aggregated all our customer contracts into a set of specs that we call our feedstock specs. So that's what we're out in the market trying to source based on, and then so that's our best way through that. And then we have a testing protocol and a qualification process that we use our learning lab in North Carolina for, to make sure our feedstocks, one, on day one run well, and then two, that we have the right steps in place to make sure each shipment comes in and gets managed against those specifications. And then thankfully, yes, all our customers are willing to and have offered us up options and alternatives that they see in their space to help us with feedstocks, whether it's introductions or potential of their own product being one of our feedstocks, because they've got waste products as well. So that's an iterative and ongoing discussion right now with the customer base.
Thank you.
Yes.
More questions?
Hi, this is Viraj. I had a quick question about the waste that you're generating in the process, up to 10% of char. What is this char? You mentioned asphalt, but just wanted to see if you had any more insights.
Yeah, we like to not call it a waste, so we call it the product we haven't sold yet, because we haven't sold it yet. So ultimately, it varies by feedstock again, because a lot of the contaminants in the feedstock end up in the char, thankfully in this case. But it's somewhat of a 30 to 40% ash, and then 60 to 70% carbonious products. So it's a mix, and arguably isn't a perfect fit for any of the markets we've looked at so far. So we're looking at, do we have to do some further processing step to make it fit more tightly into one or multiple of the markets that we'd see being value add for us to sell it into.
Thank you.
Yeah.
More questions? So I have a question on the policy side. The policy can help multiple ways, right? One is, I guess, accelerate, incentivize recycling so that more waste plastic feedstock is available for recycling. But then it could also kind of come in the form of this ill-informed view around, say, advanced recycling and things like that, right? So I guess, how are waste plastic recycling technology developers, working on some of these policy issues?
Yeah, I don't know one of us who's out there working them on their own, except for at a local level around a plant site. The majority of us have teamed up mostly with American Chemistry Council. Quite a large lobbying capability, if you will. Our chief operating officer spends far too much time in DC. I'm not a big fan of DC, but it's there for a reason. So we are there lobbying on at least quarterly, if not monthly basis. So we're part of that discussion, part of that dialogue. And then what we do is we host, on average, once every 2 months, a delegation from one or more of the states who's in transition from either having no regulations to wanting to put regulation in place. We'll host them at our plant outside of Raleigh, and then put on a tour and show them what the processing looks like. Let them feel, touch, smell the facility, so they understand it isn't a terribly odorous facility. It doesn't have a nasty flare going on. All the things that maybe are concerns, and some of the hit jobs that have been done on the industry kind of take shots at us for. It goes away when people get a chance to feel it and talk to the folks who run our facility, quite honestly. So those are the two active ways we're engaged. It's one with ACC, and then the second one was just hosting the right folks to our facility.
Excellent. Jim, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. Much appreciate this.
Thank you, Uday.
Thank you.